Sego Seba Guego, hello there all of yous. I'm making a bunch of moccasins right now, so I figured I'd film the process of making one just so I can get a video out of it. These are going to be pucker toe moccasins, which is the traditional Iroquoian way of making moccasins. The ones you see in the store I think are mostly Algonquin style. I'm not really sure. I'm going to be using a wooden foot just to make the demonstrations easier. Also going to be showing you how to make your own pattern. The first thing I'm going to do is measure the edge of the leather to about halfway across the wooden foot. Now I'm going to fold the tip of the leather over to measure that end. I made a bit of a mistake here. It should go over just enough to cover the big toenail, but not enough to cover the whole of the big toe. Oh well, we can fix that later. But now that we've got the foot in position, we're going to trace around it with chalk. This will be helpful for drawing our pattern, keeping everything in line. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to fold both edges of the leather over so that they meet and mark it with a bit of chalk. We're then going to take a ruler and measure to make sure the distances are about the same. They don't have to be perfect, but you do want the foot to have been centered when you did the initial tracing. Now we're going to fold the tip over again and then fold one of the edges to meet it. The point where they intersect is where the curve of the toe should start. Now I'm drawing a line trying to connect all of those points, trying to keep a nice even distance away from the initial tracing. I should have marked those points initially, but you make mistakes when you're filming. I'll show you how to fix it later. For the heel, we're going to measure 1 inch from the edge of the tracing, and then we're just going to make it square with the edges of the moccasin. Then we're just going to mark the other edge square as well. The finished pattern should look like half of a rectangle, half of a lopsided oval. For neatness sake, I'm just going to check the back edge of it, mark the middle, and then make sure that the initial tracing was centered. It wasn't quite, so I'm going to readjust it. And now it's time to cut it out, just using a roller cutter on a mat for this. And there we have our piece. Before I start sewing though, I'm just going to roughly trace around this cutout onto the fresh piece of leather so that I won't have to make a new pattern for the pair of this shoe. When you're cutting out the second moccasin, try and cut on the inside of the chalk line, otherwise it'll be significantly bigger than the other moccasin. And now we're ready to start sewing. Because I forgot to mark this earlier, I'm going to have to mark this again, just folding over the toe, folding over the edges, marking the intersection. This is where I'm going to choose to start the puckering of the toe. Technically it can be anywhere along the center seam, but you just need to make sure it's on the same spot on both sides. And now I sew. This first bit of stitching is going to act like a sort of drawstring to bring the toe together. I'm going to do slightly loose stitching, not too far apart, but not too tight either. I'm using fake sinew thread just because it's cheap and easy and convenient, no hassle, and I'm sewing with a Luput's needle. Luput's needles are just wonderful if you're sewing with soft leather. If you're doing a lot of work with soft leather, get one of these. They're bloody expensive, like 20 or 30 bucks per needle, but they're absolutely worth it. You'll save so much time and so many blisters. Once we've reached both our marks, we're going to pull on the long end of the thread to bring the moccasin toe together, give it a bit of shape. Be careful not to pull the thread all the way through. It's most annoying when that happens. For the next bit of sewing, we're going to use a different needle. Same thread, but we're going to switch out to a saddler's needle. Saddler's needles don't have a point, they're kind of blunt at the end, which means that it will only go through pre-existing holes, it won't make new holes. This is good for finicky little stuff like this. This bit's a little bit hard to describe and it's hard to illustrate with my hands getting in the way, but let's give it a try. First we're going to do a single stitch to bring the two halves together. Then we're going to go back and forth between the two halves through each of these furrows in a sort of cross stitch. I don't think my camera was set up well enough for me to adequately demonstrate what I was doing here, so I made this really crummy sort of graphic really quickly. Each of the blue lines represents a wrinkle in the leather. Once you get to the last wrinkle at the tip of the toe, you grab both ends of the string and you try and pull it as tight as you can. If you're lucky, it'll be really satisfying and it will all come together very nicely. If you're unlucky, like I was here, you're going to have to use the tip of the needle to pull each stitch tight independently along the seam. Once it's all tight, you just sew back the way you came. You can do a cross stitch again, or you can just do a simple running stitch. You just have to get the string back where it started. The actual work of the stitching has been done. I'm just going to tie it off now, put it back on our form so that we can stretch it out, make it into the right shape. We're not going to cut the string yet. We still need to do something on the front seam, but I'm going to work on the heel before I come back to that. Before we actually do the heel, we have to fix a mistake. Mistake I mentioned earlier, I measured the toe incorrectly. The toe box of the shoe is too big. The heel of the wooden foot isn't sitting where I marked it to be. But this is an easy enough fix, I just have to remove a 1/2 inch slice. For the stitching, I'm going to fold the two halves of the leather flat together, and then I'm going to do a cross stitch going down most of the way. You don't sew up the whole seam. The bottom part of it is going to be folded up, so you should leave about maybe 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches unstitched. It should fold up in a neat little triangle. Once you've done that, you just go back up to complete the cross stitch and tie it off at the top. For the next bit, you get a different piece of thread, fold up that little triangle at the heel, and then stitch it down along the edge. This is again kind of difficult to illustrate with my hands getting in the way, my shaky hands. Oh my god. Most moccasin patterns that you're going to find have got a little square cut into the heel of the moccasin which folds up, rather than folding the leather in this slightly complicated way to get this little triangle. I don't like doing it with the little square that you cut into it because it leaves a little gap at the corner where water can get in when you're walking on wet grass. This little triangle, it's a little bit more complicated, but it doesn't leave a little hole for wet grass dew to get through. So in the hopes of illustrating this a little bit better maybe, I've got a separate pair of moccasins here where I've stitched the heel seam all the way down. Now if you sort of imagine a foot being in it, the heel's going straight down there, and now you've got all this leftover material out here. So you sort of push this vertical, and then you've got this little triangle left over, which you just fold up. It folds up more neatly if you've got a little bit left here that isn't stitched. I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Hopefully that cleared up any miscommunication. If not, here's what it looks like from the outside, and then here's what it looks like from the inside. With the heel more or less done, we're going to return to that front seam where we left the string hanging all those minutes ago. Point your foot out straight and then draw a sort of imaginary line from the corner of your heel to the top of your ankle, right where those big tendons are. That's just about where you want the seam to end. So I'm just going to stitch this up with a simple running stitch. Nothing complicated, nothing fancy. Before you go back though, you want to make sure you can still actually get it onto the foot. It looks like I put one stitch too many here, which is easy enough to undo, but that's why you check. Once that stitch is undone, we just go back the way we came and then tie it off when we get back to our thread end. It's looking pretty good. We just have to do the cuff now. So for the cuff, we're just going to measure from the top down to about where the heel would hit the ground. So here, about 2 inches. We don't want the cuff dragging on the ground. About 2 inches is good. We also want it long enough to go from the corner to the edge of the center seam twice. So here it's about 13 inches, which is a very annoying number when you have a 12-inch ruler. This piece is very simply shaped, it's just a rectangle. Some people like to make their moccasins out of just a single piece with the cuff and the body of the moccasin being the same with no seam there. I think that makes the patterning a lot more complicated, so I think it's easier just to do the cuff separate. Before we start stitching the cuff, we're going to tack the corner in place with just a single stitch, which we can undo very easily. This will just hold everything in place, make sure the leather stretches at the same rate. Then we're going to use that thread that we left long at the heel and just start stitching it together along the edge. Just a simple running stitch. I think it provides a nice contrast when the cuff is facing a different direction from the body of the moccasin. So one is suede, one is leather. Once we get to the corner, we can undo our temporary stitch and replace it with a permanent one. On the way back, rather than doing a running stitch and completing the seam, I think it makes a nice contrast if you do a whip stitch along the edge. This makes the edge of the seam a little bit nicer, makes it feel more finished, but if you skip every other hole, you can make this really nice little pattern of arrows going along the cuff. Once you get to the heel, you just do the same on the other side and you're good to go. And there we have the finished moccasins. Not exactly my finest work, but not too bad either. I'm quite happy with these. These moccasins are pretty quick to make once you get the hang of it. Including patterning time, each of these moccasins took less than an hour, maybe 40-50 minutes. The drawback of this design of moccasin is that it's actually really hard to make if you don't have a foot or a model foot in front of you. They're not great for mass production, which is I think why they aren't commonly found in stores and stuff. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. Thank you for watching.